Continuing the Treasures of the Magi, a study of modern Zoroastrianism by James Hope Moulton. Book 1, Chapter 2, The Teachings of Zarathustra. The other possibility is that he belonged to the agricultural community, the religious value of whose occupation he preaches so strenuously. On the whole, the latter seems perhaps more probable, though a wholehearted belief in the peaceful pursuits of agriculture as against nomadism is quite natural in a far-sighted, noble, a profound religious genius. It should be added in fairness that there is one passage in the Gathas which makes Zarathustra speak as a priest. Well, he kind of spoke against the professional priest, but definitely a religious leader. It runs thus: I, as a priest, who would learn the straight path by the right, would learn by the best spirit how to practice husbandry by the thought in which it is thought of. Yasna 33 says 6. The old Aryan term Zoatar, Sanskrit Hotar, here used alone in the Gathas, does not imply a hereditary priesthood. The father of a family acted in this capacity, and here the very purpose of the priestly act is to gain illumination for the practice of husbandry. No priestly caste, therefore, is in view. The old word Atharvan, fire priest, is entirely absent from the Gathas. In all probability, by deliberate exclusion, the word Magas itself is not found even in the later Avesta, except in one late passage. The place of Zarathustra's birth and earlier life is beyond any certain conjecture. Our evidence, such as it is, dates from centuries after the prophet's day, and we can only give it a very limited credence. Professor Williams Jackson's doctrine that he was born in western Iran, preached there without success, and then turned eastwards to win success, at last in Bactria, has great plausibility, particularly if you move it a little bit north of Iran. Because Iran's just a little bit too south for certain details of the story. The main importance of the question lies in its bearing on the subject of chapter 4 below. The foundations of Zoroastrianism were laid in a corner. As far as civilization is concerned, whether of east or west, it is extremely significant that in the role of saints to be remembered in worship throughout the ages to the present time, the very large majority of the names are unknown even to legend. Now, there's a difference between remembering those who have gone by in worship and worshiping them. They are, in the main, real characters. We can, at any rate, see no conceivable reason for the invention of their names, but they lived and died in a country which had no literature that could make its appeal to the world, and no political relations with lands whose annals survive. It is quite in accord with all this that Zarathustra should have been from the first a voice crying in the wilderness. Two noble stanzas quoted above reveal the despair that oppressed him in the period of failure, when his soul went mourning because of the oppression of the enemy. He was then the leader of a small community who were poor and powerless against the raids of nomads around. He prays wistfully for some earnest of the reward that he knows is awaiting righteousness at last. Might he but have had some earthly prosperity as well as treasures in heaven. Shall I indeed, O right, earn that reward, even 10 mares with a stallion and a camel, which was promised me, O Mazda, as well as through thee the future gift of salvation and immortality. Yasna 44:18. The verse is precious for its naive reality. This lofty-minded prophet is truly a man. Now, if it is a prophetic verse, I definitely want to call it naive, but the discipline of failure and persecution through which he was called to pass had a similar manifest influence upon the prophet's religious development. It strengthened his conviction of his own mission and of the future triumph. His language about Bendva, the persecuting chieftain, and Grehma, the priest of the hostile religion, is that of the imprecatory psalms. I forbid all intercourse, discourse, with the false. Well, that too, right? Yasna 49:3 is this precept. There is no doubt as to the consequences if men disobey his teaching. No bad company is an important lesson. Those of you that put not in practice this word as I think and utter it, to them shall be woe at the end of life. Yasna 45:3. With the conviction of the divine call to the prophetic office goes a fierce intolerance of teachers who have not the truth. Well, actually, the intolerance is of evil and ignorance. It's not the people. Well, certain deeds of the people, obviously. I was ordained at the first by thee for this purpose. All others I took upon with hatred of spirit. Yasna 44:11. Remember my questions that I ask in my interviews: love, hate, fear, and hope. You kind of have to have that balance. A more extended reference to his call deserves study. As the Holy One I knew thee, Mazda Ahura, when good thought came to me and asked me, Who art thou? Whose art thou? By what sign wilt thou appoint the days for questioning about thine and thee? Then I said to him, First, Zarathustra, am I, true hater of the false man, to the uttermost of my power, but to the righteous would I be a powerful support, that I may win the future things of the infinite kingdom, according as I praise and sing thee, Mazda. As the Holy One, I knew thee, Mazda Ahura, when good thought came unto me. To his question, For what wilt thou make decision? I made reply, At every offering of reverence to thy fire, I will bethink me of right, so long as I have power. Then show me right, upon whom I call. To this Mazda replies, linking it with piety, I have come hither. Ask of us now what things we are here for thee to ask. For thine asking is that of a mighty one, since he that is able should make thee as a mighty one possessed of thy desire. As the Holy One I knew thee, Mazda Ahura, when good thought came to me, when first by your words I was instructed. Shall it bring me sorrow among men, my devotion in doing that which ye tell me is the best? And when thou saidst unto me, to write shalt thou go for learning, then thou didst not command what I did not obey. Spend the air, my obedience come, followed by treasure, laid in destiny, who shall render to men severally the destinies of the twofold aboard. Yasna 43:7-12. The passage may be regarded as a record of latter reflection upon the prophet's conversion. He has been a devout worshipper, doing service to the so-called deity of his clan before the sacred fire. Oh, well, it's the deity, not just a deity of the clan. People keep playing this game with, the name of God in this language is only this tribe or this race or something. It's like, no. Before the sacred fire, a symbol which he has received from the past with names of the wise Lord. Of course, the fire is not being called the wise Lord. But there comes to him a spiritual crisis, which he recognizes the presence of a voice of God within his soul. He stands at the parting of the ways and must choose his path. The choice is between Asha and Druj, truth and falsehood, right and wrong. He must associate himself with one of the two parties. The a Shabanu, and the Dragvanto. He makes his choice with emphasis and praise that the nature of right, the divine order, may be revealed to him. His determined prayer is rewarded by a consciousness of illumination, and he realizes how mighty is prayer when it is prayer indeed. Pray that you're doing the best, not that the best according to your wants comes through. Because honestly, there's better than your wants, usually, or at least equal to your wants in some ways, better in other ways. So we want perfection, right? So perfecting is what we want. Let's pray for that. He knows that this choice will not ensure him earthly happiness, but he confirms his choice, assured that obedience will be God's angel bringing treasure in heaven when God's own time shall come. Now, being satisfied in that, actually, secondarily, but sometimes you have to give up on the pursuit of happiness in order to have a greater happiness. Scanty through our evidence it is certainly sufficient to show that the whole scheme of Zarathustra's religion was rooted and grounded in eschatology, and this, in its turn, rises from the reformer's personal experience. The old question, why do the righteous suffer, was a most powerful element in the building up of Israel's theology, but it did not occupy the almost exclusive place that it takes in the formation of Zarathustra's thought. Of course, we must put behind it another conviction without which he would never have drawn the deductions we are following. That God is absolutely just is an axiom from which all else follows. It assures him that unmerited suffering, such as he and his followers had to bear, was in itself the warrant of a very different future, since this present world is one in which we see truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. It follows that in another world, the balance must be redressed, and right win a final victory, to be shared by those who have lived and suffered in the cause of right, gone through hardship, not necessarily suffered, because suffering is a person's own fault. Hardship, not necessarily. Hence the doctrine of personal immortality, which Zarathustra did not invent, is moralized, and a momentous step is taken in the history of religion. For be it remembered, however inevitably implied this doctrine may have been in the revelation of Sinai, it was 1,000 years after Zarathustra when Jesus drew the inference for the first time. Side by side with this doctrine of ethical rewards and punishments for the individual stands the unshakably optimistic look for the world. If God is just and almighty, he cannot tolerate the victory of wrong except as a means towards a greater triumph of right, and it is obvious that his will cannot be overborne by a stronger power. It followed indisputably that somehow good shall be the final goal of ill. If God is just and almighty, how does Zarathustra know that? It is by no means self-evident. Well, yeah, to the Christian mind maybe. So great a mind as that of Gautama rejected it. It can hardly be said that Indian thought has ever risen to it. There are Western philosophers who have dismally overshot it and came down on the side of pessimism. Whence did the sage of Iran receive his axiom in an age when men had not even realized the preliminary doctrine that God is one? Actually, no, this is something that more and more this is sort of proved wrong, is that dynamism and polytheism, well, dynamism, the power of presence, but the worship of the stars and various other things like that, this is secondary. A belief that there's a God, and maybe these other things are gods too, that is a second thought. So And we find the further we go back, monotheism, not the Christian claims of pseudo-monotheism, but monotheism itself seems to be where movements like this start, not, and then, go back to the angel worship and the saint worship and all that sorts of stuff. But in the case of Zarathustra, we have a difficulty which does not trouble us when we ask the same question about Socrates, that white soul, clothed in a satire's form, that shone beneath the laurels day by day, and filled with burning faith in God and right, doubted men's doubts away. We have the environment of Socrates and abundant materials for tracing the development of Greek thought about God, and yet, when hereditary and environment are traced with scientific fullness, how far have we come, after all, to the solution of our question? In the material world, nature may or may not work. Par salium. One who is not a naturalist would be rash indeed if he set down either alternative as preferable, but in the sphere of mine, most assuredly, Athena is perpetually springing fully grown and fully armed from the head of Zeus. Zeus is not actually always personified, by the way, or personified or gendered, by the way, but usually. That's the thing. Dagda, the good god, well, not always thought of as separate, sometimes thought as just one. All cultures that we think of as polytheist, monotheism, existed somewhere, or at least we have reason to believe that it existed somewhere among them. It is necessary to examine carefully the surroundings and antecedents of a great poet, or inventor, or prophet, but in all of them, the achievement that makes them significant for humanity is not a little methodical step in advance, perfectly normal and intelligible to those who have the data, but a sudden flash of insight and inspiration unexplained by any law known to us. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and the ways of what we call genius are not likely to be interpreted so as to fit regulations. In modern scientific attempts to delineate the history of ideas, there is often far too little allowance made for pure intuition. We have very scanty evidence as to Zarathustra's spiritual antecedents, but if we had, we should still have to fall back on the fact that he was a prophet, and his conviction of God's justice and omnipotence came to him. No one can say how. Now, prophet and sage are different things. If he is motivated and he doesn't have the spiritual calling, he doesn't have the spiritual gift, I mean, as far as, I'm not talking about intentions and making things spiritual by your intentions, that sort of thing. I'm talking about something else. And that's not what we're talking about. One feature in his conception we may be able to fix. The central figure of Asha was inherited, compared, not quite identical. Sanskrit Brita, defined in the dictionary as established order, sacred doctrine, sacred ordinance, divine law, truth, right. The impression we get from the Gathas is that the order of nature played a large part in Zarathustra's preconceptions. The thought of creation stirs him to real poetry, and he has caught the closeness of the bond uniting natural and moral law. The two fine stanzas may be quoted. He that in the beginning thus thought, let the blessed realms be filled with lights. He it is that by his wisdom created right. Those realms that the best thought shall possess, thou dost glorify, Mazda, by thy spirit, which, O Ahura, is evermore the same. I conceived of thee, O Mazda, in my thought, that thou, the first, art also the last, that thou art the father of good thought. Well, the originator. A lot of the words for father go beyond parentage. For thus I apprehended thee with mine eye, that thou didst truly create right, and art the Lord, to judge the actions of life. Yasna 31, 7 through 8. And I think possibly part of the reason why you have father mentioned so much is the Christian involvement in looking at these traditions. We may refer also to the ode in which questions are asked of the Creator to which his own name is clearly the implied answer. A verse rendering of it will be found below. Those who in Persia or in Greece guessed the presence of the word star in Zarathustra's name at least hit upon a subject that was near the sage's heart. The glory of the Creator was a thought which Zarathustra stamped indelibly upon religion. Now, the thinking of the 33 good things or the 11 good things, depending on what you're looking at. The sun's not the only. Well, I think the stars in general are listed as one, and the sun is another, and the moon is another, and water and plants, and I don't remember any of the lists, but I think after going to the bathroom, I think isn't that one of the occasions that you bring up the list of things you're grateful for? You leave you wash up and leave the bathroom, and then you get full on ablutions. And in days when its outlines have become so much blurred that scholars dispute still whether Zarathustra's name should be retained in connexion with it, King Darius could concentrate his creed at a few impressive lines. A great God is Ahura Mazda, who created this earth, who created you heaven, who created man, who created welfare for man, who made Darius king, one of many, one lord of many. To understand the meaning of Asha, which is crucial for Zarathustra's system, we must consider its opposite, Druj, which is the one name beyond all others for evil in the Gathas. The doctrine of evil in general we must return to presently, but here we must note that the whole of evil is concentrated in falsehood. This was probably an inherited element of the teaching. The prominence of truth in the theory of Persian ethics is well known, and we remember how Darius uses rauga, lie, and its corresponding verb as the regular terms for evil, which he means rebellion against himself, since, for fiend, it might be urged that the more special meaning, perfectly certain in the Gathic and Old Persian, is a development, but cognates in other Indo-European languages, and especially our own, seem to prove that the connotation of deceit was there from the first. In that case, it is striking that half a millennium before the great prophet of the exile, we should have so emphatic an anticipation of the declaration that he who worships a lower ideal than he knows, or might know, is coming before God with a lie in his right hand. For the further development of Zarathustra's doctrine of God, we must follow up the concept of Ahura, our lords, whom the next age crystallized into archangels under the class name of Ameshaspans in Pahlavi, are immortal holy ones. Well, if they are the light beings, if they are the Devis, then it's not that they're crystallized, it's that first you talk about God, and then you talk about, well, who does God command, and what are the laws of nature, and stuff like this. Or maybe you talk about that and lead your way to God, but there needed to be the distinction that these things are not to be worshipped. If we start from these latter presuppositions, we cannot help reading the Gathas with some surprise and misgiving. These archangels are perpetually placed on the same level as Ahura Mazda. The second personal pronoun is used in the plural, and phrases like Ye, O Mazda, and Asha. The very first passage of the Gathas gives us a typical instance. I would praise you as never before, right and good thought, and Mazda Ahura, and those for whom piety makes an imperishable dominion grow. Come ye to my help, at my call. The abstractions, whose names are printed here with initial capitals, are successively Asha, Vohumana, Arameti, and Kshathra. The first two of them are linked with the wise lord constantly throughout the Gathas. Ahura has one will with the best right. Yasna 28:8. He is not only creator, but even father of right. Yasna 44:3, 47:2. There's certain metaphorical elements of father. Good thought, Yasna 31:8, 45:4, and piety, Yasna 45:4. He is moreover very emphatically set above them. Thus, in Yasna 29, the curious hymn in which the ox soul pleads with right for a protector, this first of the spirits replies, Mazda knoweth best the purposes that have been wrought already by demons and by mortals, and that shall be wrought hereafter. He, Ahura, is the decider. So shall it be as he shall will. Yasna 29:4. Accordingly, appeal is made to Mazda, who pronounces his high decision. In 3 Gathic stanzas, we have 6 named together, and in marked dependence on Ahura, it may be well to quote them. And both thy gifts shall be for sustenance, even welfare and immortality. Piety linked with right shall advance the dominion of good thought, its permanence and power. By these, Mazda, dost thou bless the foes of thy foes. Yasna 34:11. Him shouldest seek to exalt with prayers of piety, him that is called wise Lord forever, for that he hath promised, through his own right and good thought, that welfare and immortality shall be in his dominion, power and permanence in his house. Yasna 45:10. Here it is well to note that power and permanence are mentioned in exactly the same way as welfare and immortality, that his dominion and his house are expressly parallel. There is, therefore, no clear marking off of the 6 as a closed company. The other verse, Yasna 47:1, has been noted as almost a mnemonic, gathering together the principal terms of worship. By his Holy Spirit, and by best thought, deed, and word, in accordance with right, Mazda Ahura, with dominion and piety, shall give to us welfare and immortality. Better than any richness, of course, is the wealth of real self-righteousness, not as some sort of insults like, oh, righteous person trying to be righteous. It's like, no, you're supposed to be at a point where you can consider yourself righteous and be humble about it. The 6 are reinforced with the Holy Spirit and the triad of word, thought, and deed. It is fairly evident that there was reason for the isolation of the 6 as supreme among spirits. It may be doubted whether the process did not go too far. There is another spirit, the ox greater, to whom Mazda is called as father. Yasna 47:3, a privilege never assigned to dominion, welfare, or immortality. Moreover, in another place, Mazda is himself creator of the ox, water and plants, welfare and immortality. Yasna 51:7. So that this spirit comes very close to Mazda's own being. On the other hand, there is an immense difference between the members of the Hexad, the last 2 being very far behind the middle pair, who, in their turn, are altogether eclipsed by the first 2. This brings us to the central point in the doctrine of the Ameshus Spans, one which has been very strangely overlooked: right and good thought and the wise Lord are invoked together again and again. And more remarkable still, we have the appeals to you, wise lords, Mazda Ahura, in the plural. Well, the plural in a lot of languages doesn't necessarily mean that you're referring to multiple beings. I mean, if you're polytheist, that's your intention for saying Allahumma and Elohim and words in even other languages. But I mean, the kings refer to themselves as we when it's just the king. So why, you know, this may be explained by a well-known idiom meaning Mazda and ye other Ahuras. A great Iranian lexicographer, Bartholomeh, would include among these Ahuras not only the Ameshaspans, but some other spirits of the same order prominent in the Gathas. But since only Asha and Vohumana are linked with Mazda in the recurrent phraseology just quoted, it seems unsafe to give the title Ahura to any others, at least in this special sense, for, like the Greek Kyrios, the title that was capable of application even to men. Now we may well ask what sort of archangels these are, which can be invoked with a deity under a common title. The question answers itself when we find that the good, best thought can be replaced by thy thought, Yasna 46:7. Is it not plain that this good thought is no more separable from God than the Spirit is in Christian theology? There is indeed a very striking parallelism throughout in that good thought, like spirit, is found in men. The divine within us, the influence, the inference that seems to the present writer inevitable is that Asha and Bahumanu are not archangels at all, but divine attributes within the hypostasis of deity, piety or meti, which is described as God's child, and the ox creator of which we have seen. The same is said in one place, while in another the function is assumed by Mazda himself, would seem to be likewise definable. And if so, there's reason why we should not include, there's no reason why we should not include dominion, kshatra, welfare,